On a Christmas Eve night in 1882, beneath a sky bleeding snow, rancher Caleb Walker discovered a young woman dying on a frozen train platform, her thin cotton dress no match for Wyoming's merciless cold. She wasn't begging, wasn't crying, just waiting for the end with silent dignity that shattered something inside him. What he did next would split his town in half and rewrite both their futures. But in that moment, with frost creeping across her dark lashes, he made a choice that asked nothing and offered everything. I invite you to follow this story to the very end. Please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. Now let me take you back to that frozen station where two strangers met in the space between survival and surrender. The wind carried ice that night, not the gentle kind that dusted rooftops and made children laugh. This was the brutal, flesh-cutting cold that turned the Wyoming frontier into a killing ground every December. The kind that found weakness, a cracked window, a thin coat, exposed skin, and punished it without mercy. Caleb Walker felt it through his sheepskin jacket as he stepped off the westbound train at Redemption Station, a glorified shed masquerading as civilization's edge. The platform was empty except for the station master already retreating inside, eager for his pot-bellied stove and whiskey. Smart man. Caleb adjusted his hat against the wind and reached for his saddlebag. Home was still an hour's ride north, and the sky promised worse before dawn. His boots hit frozen wood with hollow thuds as he moved toward the hitching post where his mare waited, breath steaming in the lamplight. Then he saw her. At first she registered as shadow, something dark against the pale bench at the platform's far end. Caleb's hand went instinctively to his belt, fingers brushing the knife handle. Drifters sometimes used the station for shelter, and desperation made men dangerous. But when the lamplight caught her, everything in him went still. She was young, 20 at most, with black hair escaping a braid that had seen better days. Her dress was cotton, thin, summer-weight cotton the color of faded cornflowers, and it clung to her small frame with the terrifying stillness of someone past shivering. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were closed. Snow gathered on her shoulders like burial flowers. She wasn't sleeping. She was dying. Caleb moved without thinking, his long strides eating the distance between them. Up close, he could see the blue tint to her lips, the frost forming along her hairline, the way her chest barely moved. Chinese, he realized. The delicate features, the almond-shaped eyes, even shut, they told stories this country didn't want to hear. "Miss," his voice came out rougher than intended. "Miss, can you hear me?" Nothing, not even a flutter of those dark lashes. He stripped off his jacket, heavy sheepskin lined with wool, still warm from his body, and draped it across her shoulders. She was so small it swallowed her completely. Then he did something his neighbors would have called foolish, something that would mark the beginning of everything that followed. He lifted her into his arms. She weighed nothing, a collection of bird bones and fading warmth wrapped in inadequate fabric. Her head lolled against his chest, and for a terrible moment Caleb thought he was already too late. Then he felt it, the faint, stubborn beating of her heart against his ribs. "Come on," he muttered, more prayer than command. "Stay with me." The station master's face appeared in the window, eyes going wide before the curtain snapped shut. No help there. Caleb's mare snorted when he approached, ears flicking at the unexpected cargo, but she stood steady as he mounted with the girl cradled against him. He settled her in front of the saddle, keeping one arm locked around her waist, while his other hand took the reins. "Easy, Daisy," he said to the horse. "Slow and steady, we've got precious cargo." The ride home stretched into eternity. Each minute felt like watching sand slip through his fingers, time he didn't have, warmth she couldn't spare. The wind fought him for every mile, howling between the pines like something hungry and mean. Twice, he stopped to check her pulse, pressing cold fingers to the delicate skin of her throat and counting the faint throbs that meant life. His cabin appeared through the snow like salvation. Rough-hewn logs chinked tight against winter, smoke trailing from the chimney where he'd banked the fire before leaving. The barn came first, and Caleb made quick work of it. He settled Daisy in her stall with hay and water, then carried the girl toward the house. Inside, the retained heat hit like a physical force. Not warm, not yet, but alive. Caleb kicked the door shut and moved straight to the fireplace, laying her on the braided rug before the hearth. His hands shook as he built up the fire, not from cold, but from something closer to fear. He'd seen death before. Hell, he'd dealt it when necessary. But watching it creep across this stranger's face, stealing color and warmth, and the chance she'd ever open her eyes again, that was different. That felt personal. "All right," he said aloud, needing the sound of his own voice. "Let's get you warm." The wet dress had to go. Caleb worked quickly, trying to maintain some measure of dignity while removing fabric that clung like a second skin. Beneath it, her body told stories. Old bruises, faded yellow-green, newer ones still purple-dark, the kind of marks that came from hands meant to hurt rather than hold. His jaw clenched, but he kept his touch gentle. He wrapped her in his spare wool blanket, then his quilt, the one his mother had made before the fever took her, star patterns stitched in blue and white. Then he did something that would have scandalized the church ladies, but was purely practical. He lay down beside her, adding his body's warmth to the equation. "I'm Caleb," he told her quiet form. "Caleb Walker. This is my home, such as it is. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. I give you my word." The fire crackled. Wind rattled the windows. And slowly, infinitely slowly, color began returning to her face. He didn't know when he dozed off, exhaustion finally claiming its due. But he woke to movement, a sharp intake of breath, the sudden tension of someone surfacing from nightmare into uncertainty. Her eyes were open. They were the darkest brown he'd ever seen, almost black in the firelight, and they held enough fear to stop his heart. She stared at him like he was a wolf circling wounded prey, her body rigid beneath the blankets. "Easy," Caleb said, not moving. "You're all right. You were freezing on the train platform. I brought you here to warm up." She said nothing, just watched him with those enormous eyes, calculating distance to the door, assessing threats, deciding if fighting or running offered better odds. Slowly, Caleb sat up, putting space between them. "I'm not going to hurt you. I know you got no reason to trust that, but it's true." He gestured to the quilt. "That there belonged to my mother. Only thing I got left of her. I wouldn't wrap you in it if I meant you harm." Still nothing. But something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the faintest crack in the armor. "You got a name?" he asked. Silence stretched long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so soft he almost missed it. "Leanne." Her voice carried an accent that turned the syllables musical, and something about the way she said it, like she was testing if the name still belonged to her, made his chest ache. "Leanne," he repeated, trying to honor the pronunciation. "That's pretty. I'm Caleb Walker. This is my cabin, about 7 miles north of Redemption Station." She processed this information with visible effort, her gaze sweeping the room. It wasn't much. One room that served for cooking, eating, and sleeping, with a small back area for storing supplies and bathing, rough furniture built by his own hands, pelts on the walls for extra insulation, a life built for one, not company. "How did I—" She stopped, swallowed, tried again. "The station. I was waiting." "For what?" Something shuddered in her eyes. "It doesn't matter. They didn't come." The way she said it suggested whoever they were, she'd known they wouldn't, that she'd been sitting on that bench not waiting for rescue, but for the cold to finish what loneliness had started. Caleb stood carefully, watching her track his movement. "You must be hungry. I got some stew left from yesterday. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill you up." He moved to the small stove, stoking it back to life and setting the pot to warm. Behind him, he heard the rustle of blankets, then small sounds that might have been her sitting up. He kept his back turned, giving her space to breathe. "Why?" The question came quiet, but direct. "Why did you bring me here?" Caleb ladled stew into 2 bowls, considering his answer. "Same reason I'd pull a calf from a frozen stream or splint a bird's wing. Seemed like the thing to do." "You don't know me." "No." He turned, offering her a bowl and spoon. "But I know cold and I know dying, and you were doing both. Didn't seem right to walk away from that." She took the bowl with both hands, and he noticed how carefully she held it, like something that might be taken away. Her first spoonful was small, testing, but her second came faster. Hunger, when allowed, made itself known. They ate in silence, the fire popping companionably between them. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye, cataloging details. The way she kept her back to the wall. How her gaze flicked to the door every few minutes. The fact that despite obvious hunger, she left 3 spoonfuls in the bowl, like she'd learned not to finish everything, lest she be punished for greed. "There's more," he said when she set the bowl down. "You don't gotta ration it." "I'm not—" She stopped, started over. "Thank you. I'm full." Liar, he thought, but didn't push. Instead, he collected the bowls and set them in the wash basin. Outside, the storm had strengthened, wind howling like something wounded. No one would be traveling tonight. Hell, no one with sense would even look outside. "Storm's getting worse," he said. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if you want. I can take you back to town, or wherever you need to go." "I have nowhere to go." The words came flat, factual, and they hit him harder than any accusation could have. Caleb turned to find her staring at her hands, small, work-roughened hands with broken nails and healing cuts across the knuckles. "Then you'll stay until you do," he heard himself say. Her head snapped up. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." "I won't—" Color flooded her cheeks. "I won't do certain things. Not for shelter, not for food, not for anything." The quiet fury in her voice told him she'd been asked before. Probably more than asked. Caleb felt his own anger rise, cold and controlled, at whoever had put that steel in her spine and shame in her eyes. "Good," he said simply, "because I'm not asking. You want to stay, you stay. You want to leave, I'll help you leave. But while you're under this roof, the only thing required is respect. Mine for you, yours for me. That's the deal." She studied him like he was a puzzle missing pieces, trying to find the trick, the angle, the hidden cost. Women like her, women who'd survived what those bruises suggested, they learned not to trust easy words or kind faces. "Why?" she asked again, and this time the question carried weight. Not why save her, but why offer this? Why ask nothing? Why treat her like her choices mattered? Caleb met her eyes steady. "Because nobody should have to freeze to death on a train platform on Christmas Eve. And because you got a right to decide your own path, whatever that looks like." The silence that followed felt different, fragile, but not hostile. Like the moment before ice breaks, uncertain if it will crack or hold. "I left someone," Leon said suddenly. "A man in San Francisco. He said he would give me work, help me send money to my family. But the work was—" She swallowed hard. "The debt kept growing. He said I owed him, that I belonged to him until it was paid. And you ran." "I ran." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He will look for me. Men like him always do." Caleb absorbed this information, filing it away. Let him look. This is Wyoming territory, not California. Man wants to claim ownership of another person. He'll find frontier justice has different ideas about that. "You don't understand. He has money, connections. I'm just—" "Just what?" Caleb's voice came out sharper than intended. He softened it. "You're just a person who deserves better than being treated like property. That's all that matters." Leon's throat worked, her eyes too bright. "You're either very kind or very foolish." "Been called worse." He moved to the small trunk at the foot of his bed and pulled out a clean shirt, worn soft from washing, too large for her by half, but better than the damp dress. "Here, you can sleep in this. He gestured vaguely. "I'll bed down by the fire. Give you privacy." She took the shirt, fingers brushing his briefly. "Caleb." It was the first time she'd said his name, and something about the way it sounded in her accent, the slight emphasis on the second syllable, turning it into something almost musical, made him pause. "Thank you," she said, "for my life." He nodded, not trusting his voice, and turned away to give her space to change. That night, lying on the hard floor with the fire at his back and a stranger in his bed, Caleb Walker stared at the shadows dancing across his ceiling and wondered what exactly he'd invited into his carefully constructed solitude. But when he heard her breathing finally, even out into sleep, something in his chest loosened. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. It always did. The town would talk, questions would come, and somewhere in California, a man who thought he owned people was probably already making plans. Let him come. Because on a frozen Christmas Eve, beneath a sky-bleeding snow, Caleb had made a choice. Not to save her, she'd done that herself by surviving long enough to be found, but to offer shelter without conditions, safety without strings, the simple, radical dignity of having a choice. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two people who'd been strangers hours ago slept in the same small space, held by walls that kept the cold at bay, and something fragile building between them. Something that looked, if you squinted just right, like the beginning of trust. Morning arrived gray and hushed, the storm having spent itself somewhere in the dark hours. Caleb woke to pale light filtering through frosted windows and the smell of coffee, which was strange because he hadn't made any. He sat up, blanket falling away, and found Leanne at his stove. She'd dressed in her own clothes again, dried overnight by the fire, and was carefully measuring grounds into his battered pot. Her movements were precise, economical, the kind learned through repetition in tight spaces where waste meant consequences. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice rough with sleep. She startled slightly, not having heard him wake. "You gave me shelter, food. It's the least I can do." Still didn't have to. "I wanted to." She poured water from the kettle, her back still to him. "I'm not good at accepting charity." "It's not charity, it's coffee." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "In my experience, nothing is just what it seems." Caleb stood, stretching muscles stiff from the floor, and moved to the basin to splash water on his face. The cold shocked the last of sleep away. "Then I guess I'll have to prove you wrong." They shared the coffee in companionable quiet, steam rising between them like small ghosts. Outside, the world lay buried under fresh snow, pristine and deceptive in its beauty. Caleb knew what that snow meant: drifts high enough to trap livestock, ice making simple travel dangerous, the kind of cold that killed quickly if you weren't prepared. "I should check the livestock," he said, setting down his cup. "Make sure the storm didn't damage anything." "I can help." He started to refuse automatically, then caught the look in her eyes. Not pleading, but something closer to determination. The need to be useful, to earn her keep, even though he'd asked for nothing. Pride, he recognized, the kind that kept people going when everything else had been stripped away. "All right," he said, "but you'll need warmer clothes than that dress." He found her an old pair of his work pants. She had to roll the cuffs multiple times, and a wool shirt that hung like a tent. His spare coat swallowed her whole, but it was lined and warm. She looked like a child playing dress-up, but her eyes held nothing childish as she followed him into the white morning. The barn stood solid against the drifts, his construction sound. Inside, Daisy nickered a greeting, and the two milk cows looked up from their hay with bovine patience. Everything had weathered the storm intact. Caleb showed Leanne how he liked the feeding done. The particular way he checked hooves for packed ice, the rhythm of work that shaped his days. She absorbed it all with focused attention, asking questions that showed she'd worked around animals before. "You grew up on a farm?" he asked, pitching fresh hay. "My father had land, rice paddies mostly, some vegetables." Her hands moved efficiently, mimicking his motions. "Before the drought, before we lost everything." "That why you came to America?" "That's why I had no choice but to come." The distinction mattered to her. "My family needed money. A man came to our village offering work in the Golden Mountain. That's what we called California. Good wages," he said. "A chance to send money home." Her voice went flat. He lied about many things. Caleb wanted to press, to understand the full shape of what she'd endured, but something in her posture, the way her shoulders hunched slightly inward, told him she'd shared enough for now. Some stories needed time before they could be fully told. They worked in silence until the barn was tended, then trudged back through knee-deep snow to the cabin. Leanne's cheeks were pink with cold and exertion, her breath coming quick, but something in her expression looked lighter. Work, Caleb knew, had its own kind of medicine. Inside, he built up the fire while she started breakfast, which apparently meant taking over his kitchen entirely, transforming his simple stores of eggs, bacon, and bread into something that smelled like heaven and made his mouth water. "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" he asked, watching her flip eggs with practiced ease. "The restaurant in San Francisco." She didn't look at him. "Before it became other things. The owner's wife taught me. She was kind until she wasn't allowed to be anymore." "What happened?" Her husband decided I was worth more serving men in private than serving food in public. The spatula clattered against the pan. She apologized while packing my things, said business was business, that I should be grateful he was offering such special attention. Caleb's hands clenched. Did you? No. The word came sharp as broken glass. I ran that night, took what little I had and bought a train ticket east. I thought distance would matter, that if I went far enough, he wouldn't follow. She finally met his eyes. I was wrong. He sent men. They found me in Denver and Salt Lake City. Every time I ran, they found me. Yeah, how'd you end up in Redemption? I stole money from one of them. Not much, but enough for one more ticket. I picked the smallest town on the route, the one that seemed like nowhere. Her smile held no humor. I was right about that, at least. Redemption's not much, Caleb admitted. But it's got some good people. Some not so good, but that's anywhere. She slid eggs onto 2 plates, adding bacon and toasted bread. And which are you? Still figuring that out, I reckon. Ate at a small table, really just a board nailed between 2 supports, and Caleb found himself acutely aware of how long it had been since he'd shared a meal with someone. Not since Sarah, and those memories carried weight he didn't want to examine too closely right now. Tell me about this place, Leanne said, breaking into his thoughts. Redemption. Is it truly as small as it seems? Smaller, maybe 200 people if you count the outlying ranches. 1 main street with the general store, saloon, church, and sheriff's office. That's about it. And the people? Will they... She hesitated. Will they object to me being here? Caleb set down his fork, meeting her eyes straight on. Some will. Probably more than some, if I'm honest. This town's not known for welcoming strangers, especially not Chinese ones, she finished. You can say it. I know what I am. I was going to say especially not anyone different from what they're used to, but yeah, that'll be part of it. He leaned back in his chair. Thing is, I don't much care what they think. This is my land, my home. You're my guest. Anyone's got a problem with that, they can take it up with me. That's very noble, also very foolish. So you said before. He grinned, surprising himself. I'm starting to think foolish might be my natural state. This time her lips definitely curved upward. Small, brief, but real. And Caleb found himself wanting to see it again, that tiny crack in her armor that let light through. The rest of the day passed in the strange, suspended way of snowbound time. Caleb worked on mending tack while Leanne insisted on tackling his shamefully neglected mending pile. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Occasionally he'd look up to find her watching him, or she'd catch him studying her, and they'd both quickly look away like children caught stealing cookies. As evening approached and lamplight replaced daylight, Leanne finally spoke the question that had clearly been weighing on her. How long can I stay? Caleb looked up from the bridle he'd been oiling. Long as you need to. I have no money, no prospects, nothing to offer in return. Didn't ask for anything. Everyone asks for something eventually. Her voice carried the weight of hard experience. Even kind men, especially kind men sometimes. He set the bridle aside and faced her fully. I'm not going to lie and say I don't want anything. I do. Her spine straightened, hands stilling on the shirt she'd been mending. What? I want you to stop looking at me like I'm about to hurt you. I want you to eat a full bowl of stew instead of leaving half. I want you to sleep without nightmares. I hear you at night, fighting something in your dreams. He kept his voice steady, factual. But those aren't things you can give me. Those are things you'll find or not in your own time. So until then, you stay, you heal, you figure out what comes next, and I go about my business. That's all. She stared at him, mouth slightly open, eyes too bright. I don't understand you. Don't need to understand me. Just need to trust that I mean what I say. Trust is expensive. So is living scared. Caleb stood, moving to the window where snow had started falling again. Light this time. Not the killing kind. I had someone I loved once. Sarah. She died 3 years back, fever that took half the county. Before she went, she made me promise something. He felt Leanne's attention sharpen behind him. She said, Caleb Walker, You're going to want to crawl in this grave with me. Don't you dare. You keep living. You keep being kind. You keep making space in this world for good things, even when it hurts." His throat tightened at the memory. "I've done the living part. But the rest, that's been harder. Easier to keep to myself, not let anyone close enough to matter." "Then why me? Why now?" He turned to face her. "Because when I saw you on that platform, all I could think was, Sarah would never forgive me if I walked away. And maybe because helping you is the first thing in 3 years that's felt like living instead of just surviving." Silence fell between them, heavy with things unsaid. Outside, night deepened and snow whispered against windows. Inside, 2 damaged people sat with their guards partially lowered, neither quite ready to reach across the distance, but both aware of its shrinking. "I'll stay," Leon said finally, "until the spring thaw. Then I'll move on, find work, stop being your burden." "You're not." "Please," she held up a hand. "Let me have this. Let me believe I'm not just taking, that there's an endpoint where I'll stand on my own again. I need that." Caleb nodded, understanding. Pride mattered. Purpose mattered. The belief that you were more than just someone else's problem, that mattered most of all. "Spring, then," he agreed. "But for what it's worth, I don't think you were ever anyone's burden. Just someone who got dealt a bad hand and played it the best you could." Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked it back, returning to her mending with hands that trembled slightly. And Caleb, turning back to his tack, felt something shift in his chest. Not love. Too soon, too fast for that. But possibility. The sense that maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe there was still space in this world for good things. Even if they arrived half frozen on a train platform, carried fear in their eyes, and trusted as reluctantly as wild things learn to eat from an open hand. Outside, snow continued falling, blanketing the world in white. And inside a small cabin on the Wyoming frontier, 2 strangers began the slow, uncertain work of becoming something more. The morning after their agreement came brittle and bright, sunlight reflecting off snow with enough force to make eyes water. Caleb woke to find Leon already dressed, standing at the window with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the white expanse like it held answers she couldn't quite read. "You sleep all right?" he asked, sitting up. She didn't turn. "I dreamed I was back at the station, but this time no one came." The quiet acceptance in her voice told him this wasn't the worst nightmare she'd had. Caleb stood, joints protesting the cold, and moved to stoke the fire back to life. "Well, someone did come, and you're here. That's what matters. For now." He let it rest there, not pushing. Some fears needed time to loosen their grip. After breakfast, Caleb announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. Leon's face went carefully blank, the way it did when she was working hard not to show emotion. "I could go alone," he offered. "Leave you here where it's warm." "No." The word came too quick, edged with something close to panic. "I mean, if you're going to town, people will ask questions. Better I'm there to answer them myself than have you make excuses." "I wouldn't make excuses for you. I'd tell them the truth." "Which is?" "That you needed help, and I gave it. Simple as that." Leanne's laugh carried no humor. "Nothing is ever simple when it comes to people like me." An hour later, they rode into Redemption on Daisy, Leanne seated in front of Caleb, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. He felt her tension increase with every step closer to town, her spine going rigid as buildings came into view. Redemption looked like 100 other frontier towns. A single muddy street lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more than they delivered. The general store anchored one end, the saloon the other, with the church, sheriff's office, and a handful of other establishments scattered between. Modest, hardscrabble, and suspicious of anything that didn't fit its narrow definition of normal. Caleb felt eyes tracking them before they'd even dismounted. Mrs. Henderson paused mid-sweep outside her boarding house, broom forgotten. The blacksmith's hammer went silent. Even the dogs seemed to stop and stare. "Steady," Caleb murmured, not sure if he was talking to Leanne or himself. He helped her down, then tied Daisy to the hitching post outside Morrison's general store. The door stood open despite the cold, and through it came the mingled smells of coffee, leather, and the penny candy that had tasted like heaven when he was a boy. Inside, Abraham Morrison looked up from his ledger, his weathered face going through a rapid series of expressions. Surprise, confusion, then something harder to read. His wife Ellen emerged from the back room, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron, and stopped dead. "Morning, Abe, Ellen," Caleb said, keeping his voice easy. "Need to stock up on some staples. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork if you've got it." Abraham's eyes hadn't left Leanne, who stood slightly behind Caleb, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere around the middle shelf. "Caleb, didn't expect to see you in town so soon after the storm. Ran low on a few things. Happens." "I see." Abraham's attention shifted pointedly to Leanne, then back. "You gonna introduce your companion?" The pause before companion carried enough weight to flatten mountains. Caleb felt Leanne flinch slightly, though she didn't move. "This is Leanne Joe," he said clearly. "She's staying at my place for a spell." Ellen Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Staying at your place? Caleb Walker, what on earth?" "She needed help," Caleb cut in, his tone allowing no argument. "I provided it. Now, about those supplies?" The bell above the door jangled, and Sheriff Tom Garrett walked in, bringing cold air and the kind of timing that suggested he'd been watching the street. Tom was a solid man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been fair to Caleb over the years, but fair didn't always mean friendly. "Caleb," Tom said, nodding. Then his gaze landed on Leanne. "Ma'am." Leanne dipped her head in acknowledgement but said nothing. "Tom." Caleb kept his posture relaxed, non-threatening. "Just picking up supplies." "So I see." Tom hooked his thumbs in his belt, a casual gesture that somehow conveyed authority. "Mind if I have a word? Outside?" It wasn't really a question. Caleb glanced at Leanne, who gave the smallest nod, then followed the sheriff onto the wooden sidewalk. The door closed behind them, but not before he caught Ellen Morrison leaning toward Leanne with a smile that looked more predatory than welcoming. Outside, Tom didn't waste time. "Want to tell me what's going on?" "Not much to tell. Found her at the station Christmas Eve, half frozen to death. Brought her home, warmed her up. She's staying until she figures out her next move." "Uh-huh." Tom pulled out his tobacco pouch, began rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "And you didn't think to bring her to me? Or to Ellen Morrison, who runs a proper boarding house for women?" "Didn't seem necessary. She needed immediate help, and I was there." "Caleb." Tom lit the cigarette, took a long drag. "You're not a stupid man, so don't play one now. You know how this looks? You, living alone since Sarah died, suddenly taking in a young Chinese woman. People are going to talk." "Let them talk." "It's not just talk I'm worried about." Tom's voice dropped. "There's laws about this kind of thing. Chinese Exclusion Act's been in effect for near about a year now. She's here legally?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't know. Didn't ask." "Well, I'm asking, because if she's not, that makes her my problem, and by extension, makes you my problem for harboring her. She's a person who is dying, Tom, not a problem to be solved." "That's real noble, Caleb. It truly is. But nobility doesn't change the law." Tom studied him through a curl of smoke. "I'm going to need to talk to her, get her story, make sure everything's above board." Before Caleb could respond, the door burst open and Ellen Morrison stuck her head out, her face flushed with something between excitement and indignation. "Sheriff, you better come hear this." Inside, they found Leanne backed against the counter, her face pale but composed, while Ellen stood with her arms crossed, radiating righteous anger. "She barely speaks English," Ellen announced, as if Leanne wasn't standing right there. "I asked her simple questions, where she's from, what she's doing here, and she can hardly answer. Caleb, this girl is clearly in some kind of trouble. The Christian thing to do is turn her over to proper authorities who can help her people." "I speak English fine," Leanne said, her voice quiet but steady. "I simply choose not to share my life story with strangers who look at me like I'm diseased." Ellen's mouth fell open. Abraham coughed to cover what might have been a laugh. Tom's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval. "Miss Joe," Tom said formally, "I'm Sheriff Tom Garrett. I need to ask you some questions. Are you in this country legally?" Leanne lifted her chin, meeting his gaze straight on. "I came through San Francisco 2 years ago with papers arranged by my employer." Whether those papers were legitimate, I don't know. I was told they were. I was told many things that turned out to be lies. What kind of employment? Restaurant work initially, then she paused, seeming to weigh her words. Other services I didn't agree to provide. Tom's expression darkened. I see. And you ran from this employer? Multiple times. He found me each time, sent men to bring me back. I kept running. Her hands clenched at her sides. I have no legal documents now. They were taken from me the first time I tried to leave. So if you're asking if I can prove I have a right to be here, the answer is no. But I'm here anyway, and I won't go back to him. The silence that followed felt dense enough to cut with a knife. Ellen Morrison looked between Leanne and the sheriff, clearly expecting immediate action. Abraham had stopped even pretending to work on his ledger. Caleb stood very still, every muscle ready to move if Tom reached for his handcuffs. But Tom just took another drag on his cigarette, studying Leanne with eyes that had seen too much of the world's ugliness to be easily shocked. This employer have a name? Chen Wei. He owns several businesses in San Francisco's Chinatown. Restaurants, laundries, boarding houses. She spoke the name like it tasted of poison. And other enterprises the law pretends not to see. And these men he sent after you? They hurt you? Leanne's hand moved unconsciously to her ribs, where bruises had faded from purple to yellow-green. Yes. Tom nodded slowly, then looked at Caleb. She can't stay with you, not as things stand. It's not proper, and it puts you both in a difficult position legally. Then what do you suggest? Caleb's voice came out harder than intended. Ellen's boarding house is the right place for her. Respectable, chaperoned, appropriate for a young woman without family. No. Leanne's voice cut through with unexpected force. Both men turned to her. No boarding house. No strangers having claim over where I sleep, what I eat, when I can come and go. I've had enough of being owned by people who call it kindness. Ellen drew herself up indignantly. I would never. You already are, Leanne interrupted. The way you look at me, talk about me like I'm not here, decide what's best for me without asking, that's ownership with a nicer name. Mr. Walker offered me shelter without conditions. I accepted. That's the arrangement. It's improper, Ellen insisted, looking to Tom for support. So is beating women and forcing them into prostitution, Tom said dryly. But somehow that happens plenty without folks getting nearly as worked up. He dropped his cigarette, ground it under his boot. Tell you what, Miss Jo stays with Caleb for now, but I'll be checking in regular. Any hint of impropriety, any suggestion she's being coerced or mistreated, and we revisit the arrangement. Fair? It wasn't fair, not really. Women and men lived together all over the frontier without such scrutiny, as long as they had the right color skin and enough money to make people look the other way. But it was better than the alternative. Fair, Caleb agreed. Leanne just nodded, some of the rigidity leaving her shoulders. Ellen Morrison looked like she'd bitten into something rotten. This is highly irregular, Tom. Highly irregular. What will people say? Same thing they always say, I expect. Lots of opinions about other folks' business, not much willingness to actually help when help's needed. Tom tipped his hat to Leanne. Ma'am, Caleb, y'all have a good day. He left, taking some of the tension with him. Ellen huffed her disapproval, but retreated to the back room, leaving Abraham to finish Caleb's order. The old man worked in silence, weighing out flour and sugar, wrapping salt pork in brown paper. That'll be $4.30, he said finally. Caleb paid, loaded the supplies into his saddlebags, and helped Leanne back onto Daisy. They were halfway down the street when a voice called out, Caleb Walker! He turned to see Reverend Samuel Price emerging from the church, his black coat stark against the snow, his face arranged in what Caleb had come to recognize as his concerned shepherd expression. Reverend, Caleb said, not bothering to dismount, I couldn't help but notice you've taken in a guest. Samuel's eyes flicked to Leanne, then away, as if looking at her directly might contaminate him. The ladies of the church are concerned about the appearance of sin. Perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements? Already discussed it with the sheriff. We're good. The sheriff answers to man's law. I answer to higher authority. Samuel moved closer, his voice dropping to something meant to sound kind, but landing closer to condescending. This young woman needs spiritual guidance, Caleb. The church has mission programs specifically designed for souls like hers. We could help her find her way to salvation. Behind him, Caleb felt Leon go rigid again, but this time anger radiated off her like heat. My soul, she said clearly, is not lost, and I don't need saving from people who think my skin color determines my worth. Samuel's face flushed. I never said, you didn't have to. I've heard every version of this speech. Let us help you. Let us save you. Let us teach you to be more like us. As if being Chinese is a disease you can cure with enough prayer and white people's approval. She leaned forward slightly. I may not have money or legal papers or a place I belong, but I have my soul. And it's mine, not yours to save. The Reverend opened and closed his mouth several times, looking remarkably like a fish drowning in air. Finally he managed, the Lord teaches us to welcome strangers, but also to maintain moral standards. The Lord also taught something about casting stones, Caleb interjected, but I expect you remember that part when it's convenient. He tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness. Good day, Reverend. We'll see ourselves back to my place now. He urged Daisy forward, leaving Samuel standing in the street, his face a study in affronted dignity. They rode in silence until the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by snow and distance. I'm sorry, Leon said finally. I shouldn't have spoken to him that way. I've made things harder for you. You spoke truth. Nothing to apologize for. Truth doesn't keep people from hating you. No, Caleb agreed, but lies don't stop them either. At least with truth, you get to keep your spine straight. She was quiet for a moment, then, why do you do this? Defend me to them? You could have left me at that boarding house, washed your hands of the whole situation. Instead, you're making yourself an outcast for someone you barely know. Caleb considered the question as Daisy picked her way through the snow, her breath steaming in the cold air. I told you about Sarah. What I didn't tell you was how she died. It wasn't quick. Took 2 weeks from first fever to last breath. And during those 2 weeks, you know who came to help? Who? Nobody. Oh, the Reverend stopped by once to pray over her, make sure her soul was properly prepared. But actual help, sitting with her so I could sleep, bringing food, doing the 100 small things that need doing when someone's dying? Not a one. Too scared of catching the fever themselves, I guess. Can't really blame them for that. But afterward, when I was walking around half dead myself from exhaustion and grief, suddenly everyone had advice. How I should grieve. How long I should wait before courting again. What Sarah would have wanted. He felt old anger stir. None of them knew what she wanted. None of them were there. But you were. I was. And I learned that when it matters, most people choose comfort over courage. Choose protecting themselves over helping others. I don't want to be that. Don't want to look back when I'm old and realize I spent my whole life playing it safe while people died on train platforms because I was too worried about what the neighbors might think. Leon turned slightly in the saddle, enough that he could see her profile. You're a strange man, Caleb Walker. Been told that before. I meant it as a compliment. I know. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they reached the cabin, Leon dismounted without help, her movements growing more confident. She'd filled out slightly in the past few days, lost some of that hollow-eyed fragility. Or maybe she'd always had strength, she'd just needed permission to show it. That night, after supper, Leon surprised him by pulling out a small cloth bundle from her travel bag, the one possession she'd been carrying when he found her. I want to show you something, she said. Inside the cloth lay a photograph, creased and faded, showing a family of 4. A stern-faced man and a gentle-looking woman flanked by 2 children, a girl of maybe 10 and a younger boy. My family, Leon said softly, taken before the drought, before everything changed. Caleb studied the image, seeing a younger version of Leon in the girl's solemn expression. You were just a child, old enough to remember what it felt like to be safe, to belong somewhere. She traced her mother's face with one finger. I send money when I can. Not much, and not often enough. But I keep trying. It's the only thing that makes any of this feel worthwhile. You shouldn't have to make yourself worthwhile. You just are. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, of shared loneliness, of understanding what it meant to keep going when everything you'd built or believed had crumbled to dust. Tell me about her, Leon said. Sarah. if you want to. Caleb hadn't talked about Sarah, really talked about her, since the funeral. But something about the quiet cabin and Leon's patient waiting made the words come easier than expected. She was stubborn as hell, he began, and found himself smiling at the memory. First time I met her, she was trying to fix a wagon wheel all by herself, refusing to ask for help, even though it was obvious she needed it. I offered anyway. She told me she didn't need charity from strange men. What did you do? Sat down and watched her struggle for about 5 minutes. Then she threw the wrench at me, not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to make her point, and said if I was going to stand there being useless, I might as well make myself useful. He laughed softly. We were married 6 months later. She sounds fierce. She was, but also kind, the kind of person who'd give away her last bit of food if someone else needed it more. Who'd sit with sick neighbors even though we barely had 2 coins to rub together ourselves. His voice roughened. She would have liked you, would have marched right up to Reverend Price and given him an earful about Christian charity versus Christian judgment. I wish I could have known her. Yeah, me too. They sat with that for a while, the fire crackling between them, 2 people carrying the weight of loss, learning to share the load. Caleb, Leon said eventually, her voice hesitant. When spring comes and I leave, where will I go? The question had been lurking at the edges of their arrangement, unspoken but always present. Caleb had been avoiding it, not wanting to examine why the thought of her leaving made his chest tight. Don't know, he admitted. But we've got time to figure it out. Winter's not even half over yet. And if Chenwei's men find me before then they'll find me too. And I'm not nearly as easy to intimidate as whoever they've dealt with before. She studied his face in the lamplight, looking for something, reassurance maybe, or proof that his words matched his intentions. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because she nodded and returned the photograph to its cloth wrapping. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For not making promises you can't keep. For being honest about not having all the answers. She stood, moving toward the bed he'd ceded to her. Most men would lie. Tell me everything will be fine, that they'll protect me forever, that I don't need to worry. You don't do that. Lies don't help anybody. No, but truth is harder. It requires trust that the other person can handle it. She paused at the edge of the quilt. I'm starting to trust you, Caleb Walker. That terrifies me, but I'm doing it anyway. She turned away before he could respond, settling under the covers with her back to him. But Caleb sat by the fire long after her breathing evened into sleep, turning her words over in his mind. Trust was terrifying. He knew that bone deep. After Sarah, he'd locked himself away from it, built walls thick enough to keep everyone out. Safe, maybe, but also alone. Now here was Leanne, cracking those walls just by existing in his space, by cooking breakfast and mending his shirts and arguing with self-righteous reverends, by trusting him with her truth even when truth had cost her everything before. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, hunting. Inside, Caleb Walker sat watch over a sleeping woman who'd run from monsters and landed somehow in his care. He didn't know what spring would bring, didn't know if Chenwei's men would come, if the town would accept her, if the law would intervene. Didn't know if Leon would leave when the snow melted or if she'd find reason to stay. But he knew this. For the first time since Sarah died, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And terrifying as that was, he found himself willing to keep doing it. One day, one shared meal, one quiet evening at a time. Until spring came and decisions had to be made. Until then, there was warmth and safety, and 2 people learning that trust, however terrifying, was still worth the risk. The living lasted exactly 17 days. 17 days of morning coffee shared in companionable silence, of Leanne's quiet humming while she worked, of Caleb catching himself smiling at nothing in particular. 17 days of something fragile and unnamed taking root between them, growing stronger with each passing hour. Then Chenwei's men came. It happened on a Thursday, gray and cold but clear enough that Caleb had ridden out to check the far pasture fence line. He'd left Leon at this cabin with strict instructions to keep the door barred, his rifle loaded and within reach. She'd rolled her eyes at his caution, but he'd seen relief there too, the knowledge that he took the threat seriously. He was 2 miles out when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the winter quiet. Horses moving fast, multiple riders, coming from the direction of his cabin. Caleb turned Daisy so hard she grunted in protest, then gave her her head. The mare understood urgency, stretching into a gallop that ate the frozen ground. But even as they flew across the snow, ice forming on his eyebrows and his heart hammering against his ribs, Caleb knew they were too late. He saw the smoke first, not the friendly gray of a banked fire, but the thick black that came from things burning that shouldn't. Then he crested the rise and saw them, 3 men on horseback circling his cabin like wolves around wounded prey. One of them had a torch. "No," Caleb breathed, then louder, "No." He was still 50 yards out when the cabin door flew open and Leon burst through, the rifle in her hands. She got one shot off, wild high, missing by yards, before one of the riders was on her. He leaned down from his saddle, caught her by the hair, and dragged her sideways. The rifle clattered to the ground. Caleb pulled his own gun, but at this distance, on a moving horse, he was as likely to hit Leon as her attacker. He closed the gap, watching with helpless fury as the man with the torch rode close to the cabin, touching flame to the dried wood of the porch. "Let her go!" Caleb's voice carried across the snow, raw and ragged. The riders turned to face him, and for the first time he got a good look at them. 2 were white men, hard-faced and professional in a way that spoke of violence as occupation rather than passion. The third, the one holding Leon by her hair while she clawed at his wrist, was Chinese, older, with cold eyes and a thin smile that had nothing to do with humor. "Mr. Walker, I presume," this man said, his English perfect, his tone almost pleasant. "I am Liu Han, representative of Mr. Chen Wei's business interests. This woman is stolen property. We're simply recovering what belongs to our employer." "She's not property." Caleb kept Daisy moving forward, slow but steady, eating the distance between them. "She's a person, and she doesn't belong to anyone." "Legally, we beg to differ. Miss Zhou entered into a binding contract with Mr. Chen. She received passage to America, housing, employment. In exchange, she agreed to work until her debt was satisfied. She broke that contract." "She ran from being forced into prostitution," Caleb said flatly. "That's not employment, that's slavery." Liu Han's expression didn't change. Such dramatic language. Mr. Chen offers opportunities. What his employees choose to do with those opportunities is their concern. Miss Zhou made poor choices. Now she must face consequences. Behind him, flames were taking hold of the cabin, eating through dry wood with terrible efficiency. Everything Caleb owned was in there: Sarah's quilt, his mother's Bible, the few photographs that remained of a life before this one. But none of it mattered as much as the woman being held captive 20 feet away. "Let her go," he said again, "and ride out of here. That's your only warning." One of the white men laughed, a sound like gravel shifting. "That's real cute, cowboy, but you're outnumbered, outgunned, and your little hideaway's burning down. Maybe think about your own skin instead of playing hero for some Chinese whore." The words were barely out of his mouth when Caleb's bullet took his hat clean off his head. The man yelped, his horse shying sideways. "Next one goes lower," Caleb said, his voice gone cold and dead. "Liu Han, you seem like a reasonable man, so let me explain something reasonable. That woman means more to me than this cabin, this land, or my own life. You want to take her, you'll have to kill me first, and I promise you, I won't die alone." For the first time, something flickered in Liu Han's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or calculation. He looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and seemed to recognize something in his face, the kind of resolve that came not from bravado, but from having already decided which hills were worth dying on. "You would truly die for her?" Liu Han asked. "A woman you barely know, who brings you nothing but trouble?" "Already decided I would. Only question is whether you're willing to die trying to take her." The standoff held for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Lian had gone still in Liu Han's grip, her eyes locked on Caleb with an expression he couldn't quite read. The cabin burned behind them, heat and smoke rising into the pale sky. Somewhere, a crow called. Then Liu Han smiled, and it was the most frightening thing Caleb had ever seen: cold calculation dressed up as amusement. "Very well," Liu Han said. "We withdraw. For now. But understand this, Mr. Walker. Mr. Chen does not forget debts, and he does not forgive theft. We will return, perhaps with more men, perhaps with legal authority. And when we do, your noble intentions won't matter. She will come back where she belongs." He released Lian so suddenly she stumbled, catching herself on her hands in the snow. Before Caleb could react, the three riders were moving, kicking their horses into a run that carried them south toward town. Caleb tracked them with his gun until they disappeared, then wheeled Daisy toward Lian. She was already on her feet, staring at the burning cabin with something like despair written across her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Everything you had is just things." Caleb cut her off, dismounting and pulling her against his chest before he could think better of it. She was shaking, whether from cold or shock or both, he couldn't tell. "Things can be replaced. You can't." "I should have fought harder, should have—" "You fought exactly right. You're alive. That's what matters." They stood like that while the cabin collapsed in on itself, decades of living reduced to ash and ember. Caleb felt Lian's tears soak through his shirt, felt her fingers clutch at his back like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid and unstable. When the worst of it was over, when the flames had died to sullen red coals sending smoke signals into the winter sky, Caleb gently extracted himself and surveyed the damage. The barn had been spared, too far from the cabin, too wet from recent snow. His livestock were safe, but everything else was gone. "What do we do now?" Lian asked, her voice small. "Now we go to town, talk to Sheriff Garrett, get you somewhere safe while I figure out our next move." "You heard him. They'll come back. With more men, with legal papers. They'll take me, and there's nothing—" "There's always something," Caleb interrupted. "We just have to find it." The ride to redemption felt longer than the distance warranted, both of them acutely aware of how exposed they were on the open road. But no riders appeared. No ambush materialized. Just the two of them and Daisy, moving through a landscape that suddenly felt hostile in ways it never had before. Tom Garrett took one look at them, smoke-stained, hollow-eyed, Lian riding with Caleb like they were fleeing the end of the world, and ushered them into his office without a word. He poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting too long on the stove, handed them both cups, and waited. Caleb told it straight, the men, the threats, the burning cabin. Tom listened without interrupting, his weathered face giving nothing away. When Caleb finished, the sheriff sat back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "This Chen Wei," Tom said. "He's the same man you mentioned before, the one from San Francisco?" Lian nodded. "He owns much of Chinatown, restaurants, gambling houses, boarding houses for newly arrived immigrants. He provides passage from China in exchange for labor contracts. Most people who sign them never work off their debt. Indentured servitude. In practice, yes, but the contracts are legal, signed and witnessed. The courts recognize them." Tom's jaw tightened. "Slavery by another name." "The law doesn't see it that way," Lian said quietly. "Especially not when the workers are Chinese. We're not really people to them, just labor, problems to be managed." "That's a hell of a thing to say about our justice system." "It's the truth. You know it is." Tom didn't argue because he couldn't. They all knew how this worked. Chinese workers used up and discarded, their complaints ignored, their rights theoretical at best. The same country that had fought a war to end slavery had found new ways to own people, ways that let folks sleep at night because the contracts were legal and the workers weren't quite white enough to matter. "All right," Tom said finally. "First things first. Lian, you can't go back to Caleb's place. There's no place to go back to. Ellen Morrison's boarding house—" "No," Lian and Caleb said simultaneously. Tom sighed. "I had a feeling. Look, I understand the concerns, but we need somewhere that's defensible. Somewhere these men won't try anything stupid." "What about here?" Caleb suggested. "You've got a jail cell. Lock her in for her own protection." "That's your solution? Put her in a cage to keep her safe from people who want to put her in a different kind of cage?" Tom shook his head. "No, I won't do that to her." "Then what?" Caleb's frustration was building, fueled by exhaustion and the fading adrenaline of combat. "We can't just hope that they don't come back. Luhan made it clear. This isn't over." "No, it's not. But it's also not your fight alone." Tom stood, moved to the window overlooking Main Street. "Here's what I'm thinking. Lian stays with my wife and me. We've got a spare room, and anyone who wants to get to her will have to go through a lawman first. That might make them think twice. Or it might make them shoot first, Caleb countered. Maybe, but I took an oath to protect people in this county. That includes Chinese women running from bastards who think ownership is a business model. He turned back to them. I'll send a telegram to the federal marshal in Cheyenne, see if we can get some official backing. Meanwhile, we document everything, the threats, the burning, all of it. Build a case that'll hold up if this goes to court. And if it doesn't go to court, Leon asked, if they just take me by force? Then they'll find out that frontier justice can be right permanent when it needs to be. Tom's voice carried the weight of a man who'd done hard things before and would do them again if pushed. Caleb's not wrong about one thing. You're a person, not property. And in my jurisdiction, people get protected, even the ones some folks would rather ignore. Leon's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. Why? Why would you risk yourself for me? Because I've got a daughter about your age, lives back east with her mother. We divorced years back, wasn't a good marriage. But I think about her sometimes, wonder what would happen if she got into trouble, needed help from strangers. He looked at Leanne directly. I'd hope someone would stand up for her, do the right thing even when it's inconvenient. Figure I should be willing to do the same. Something passed between them then, an understanding, a connection forged not from similarity, but from shared recognition of human dignity. Caleb felt his chest tighten watching it, this moment of grace in a situation defined by cruelty. Thank you, Leon said simply. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead. Tom moved toward the door. Come on. I'll take you home, introduce you to Martha. She'll get you settled. Martha Garrett turned out to be a force of nature compressed into a 5-foot frame, all efficiency and no-nonsense kindness. She took one look at Leon's smoke-stained dress and haunted eyes and immediately set about making space, drawing a bath, finding clean clothes. Within an hour, Leanne was settled in the spare room, fed and resting, while the adults gathered in the kitchen to plan. Caleb, Martha said, her tone leaving no room for argument, you look like you're about to fall over. When's the last time you slept? Don't remember. Then you'll stay here too. Couch in the parlor's yours for the night. Tomorrow you can figure out rebuilding, but tonight you rest. He wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up fast, dragging at his limbs and making his thoughts slow and sticky. All right, but just tonight. Martha's expression said she'd heard that before and didn't believe it, but she didn't push. Instead, she set about making up the couch, while Tom and Caleb sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee that had finally been replaced with a fresh pot. Tell me about this Liu Han, Tom said. You get a sense of him? What kind of man we're dealing with? Caleb considered the question, replaying the confrontation in his mind. Smart, controlled, not a hired thug. He's got authority, makes decisions. And he believed every word he said about ownership and debt. Wasn't lying or exaggerating. That's just how he sees the world. Men like that are dangerous. They don't get angry. They get systematic. Yeah. Caleb stared into his coffee. He'll be back. And next time he'll have a better plan. So will we. Tom pulled out paper and pencil, began making notes. We need to know more about Chen Wei's operation, how far his reach extends, what kind of legal backing he's got. I'll contact some friends in San Francisco, see what I can dig up. Meanwhile, you need to think about what comes next, where you'll live, how you'll rebuild. Don't care about that right now. Well, you should, because if this goes the distance, you'll need stability, a place that's defendable, resources. Tom met his eyes. And you need to decide what Leanne means to you, because the way you wrote in today, the way you looked at her, that's not just charity, Caleb. That's something else. Caleb wanted to deny it, to claim it was simple decency, nothing more. But Tom had been a lawman too long to be fooled by easy lies, and Caleb had never been good at lying to himself. I don't know what it is, he admitted. All I know is that when I saw them holding her, all I could think was that I'd burn the whole world down before I let them take her. That's not rational. That's not smart. But it's true. Love rarely is rational or smart, but it's worth fighting for all the same. It's not love. It's barely been 3 weeks. Sarah know you loved her after 3 weeks? Caleb opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because yes, he had known. had known the moment Sarah threw that wrench at him and told him to make himself useful. Some things didn't need time to be certain. "Doesn't matter what I feel," he said instead. "What matters is keeping her safe, getting her free of this mess. After that," he shrugged. "After that's her choice. Always has been." Tom nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But Caleb, when the time comes to make choices, don't hide behind nobility. Don't pretend you don't want what you want. Life's too short and too hard for that kind of cowardice." Before Caleb could respond, footsteps on the stairs drew their attention. Leon appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in one of Martha's robes, her hair still damp from the bath. She looked younger somehow, softer, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest at the sight. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Kept thinking about everything we lost. Your mother's quilt. The photographs? They're just things. They were your history, your memories, and they burned because of me." Caleb stood, crossed to her in 3 strides, and took her hands in his. They were small and cold despite the warm bath, and he found himself rubbing them gently, trying to return warmth. "Listen to me," he said. "Those men burned my cabin. Their choice, their action, their fault. Not yours. You didn't ask for any of this. You just tried to survive. And there's no shame in that. But if I hadn't been there, if you hadn't been there, I'd still be living in that cabin alone, going through the motions, calling it a life. You didn't take anything from me, Leanne. You gave me a reason to feel something again, to care about something beyond just getting through another day." Her breath caught. "Caleb, I'm not saying you owe me anything. You don't. I'm just saying that whatever happens next, I don't regret finding you. Don't regret any of it." Tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks, and she pulled one hand free to swipe at them angrily. "You're going to make me cry in front of the sheriff." "Already crying," Tom pointed out from the table, his tone dry but not unkind. "Might as well let it out proper." Leon laughed wetly, the sound caught between sorrow and something that might have been hope. "You're both impossible." "We try," Caleb said, and found himself smiling despite everything, the burning cabin, the threats, the uncertain future. Because here, in this warm kitchen with these unlikely allies, something felt right in a way nothing had for years. They talked into the night, making plans and contingencies, mapping out paths forward that might lead to safety or might lead to more trouble. Martha brought food, and they ate without tasting it, fueled more by nervous energy than hunger. Tom sent his deputy to watch the roads leading into town, just in case Liu Han decided to try something under cover of darkness. But the night stayed quiet, and eventually exhaustion claimed them one by one. Leon went back upstairs to sleep. Martha retired to her room. Tom dozed in his chair, still dressed, his gun within easy reach. And Caleb lay on the couch, staring at shadows on the ceiling, thinking about fire and faith, and a woman who'd survived everything the world threw at her and still found strength to keep fighting. Somewhere out there, Chen Wei's men were planning their next move. Somewhere, papers were being drawn up, legal claims being filed, violence being organized under the pretense of business necessity. But here, in this small house in this small town, 3 people had decided that some things mattered more than convenience or safety or the easy path. That some fights were worth having even when the odds looked impossible. Because Lian Zhou was not property. She was not a debt to be collected or a problem to be solved. She was a person, a woman with a past and a future, with dreams deferred but not destroyed, with the right to choose her own path, even if that path led through fire. And as Caleb finally drifted towards sleep, he made a silent promise to the smoke-stained ceiling and the dark Wyoming night beyond it. They could come with their men and their lawyers and their claims of ownership. They could bring guns and torches and all the weight of a legal system designed to protect property over people. But they would not take her without a fight. Not while he still drew breath. Not while justice, real justice, the kind that looked at a person's humanity before their skin color or country of origin, still had defenders willing to stand in the gap. The storm was coming. They all knew it. But this time, when it hit, Lion wouldn't face it alone. The storm came 3 days later, but not the way they expected. Caleb had spent those 3 days at the Garrett house, helping Tom prepare defenses and plan contingencies while Lian adjusted to the strange safety of being protected rather than hunted. She'd begun teaching Martha some basic Chinese phrases, and Martha had responded by teaching Lian to bake bread, a cultural exchange that resulted in laughter and flour-dusted faces that almost made them forget the threat looming on the horizon. Almost. The telegraph from Cheyenne arrived on Sunday morning. Tom read it twice, his expression darkening with each word, then passed it to Caleb without comment. Chen Wei filed legal claim. Federal judge ruled in his favor, contract valid. Marshal arriving Tuesday with enforcement order. Caleb crushed the paper in his fist. They can't do this. She's not a piece of livestock to be returned. According to the law, the contract's binding. She signed it, accepted passage, and employment. Courts see it as breach of agreement, not slavery. Tom's voice was flat, controlled, but anger simmered beneath. The marshal will have a legal order to remand her to Chen Wei's custody. When you say Tuesday, tomorrow. The word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of panic through the room. Martha appeared in the doorway, Lian just behind her, both having heard enough to understand. No, Lian said, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. I won't go back. I'll run again. You'll get caught, Tom interrupted gently. They'll be watching the roads, the train station. And this time, they've got federal backing. Running just makes you a fugitive, gives them legal justification to use force. Then what do I do? Just surrender? Let them put me back in that place? Her composure cracked, desperation bleeding through. You don't understand what it was like. What they made us do, Her voice broke completely. Martha moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. But Lian shook her off. She crossed to the window, staring out at the snow-covered street with her arms wrapped tight around herself. There has to be something, Caleb said, looking between Tom and Martha. Some legal loophole, some way to challenge this. I've been thinking about that. Tom pulled out a chair, straddled it backward. There might be one option. It's not pretty and it's not guaranteed, but it could work. Tell me. Marriage. Tom let the words sit for a moment. If Lian marries an American citizen before the marshal arrives, her legal status changes. She becomes the responsibility of her husband, not her former employer. The contract could be challenged on the grounds that a married woman's obligations transfer to her spouse. Silence filled the kitchen, like water rising. Caleb felt everyone's eyes on him, felt the weight of what Tom was really suggesting. That's not a real solution, Lian said, still facing the window. That's just trading one form of ownership for another. One man's claim for another man's claim. Not if the marriage is real, Martha said quietly. Not if it's chosen freely by both parties. Not if it's based on respect and partnership instead of control. Martha's right, Tom added. The law might see it as property transfer, but between the two people actually involved, it could be whatever they make it. Protection, partnership, a chance to start over. Lian turned from the window, her eyes finding Caleb's. You can't possibly want this. You barely know me. I know enough, Caleb heard himself say. I know you're strong and brave and worth fighting for. I know I'd rather marry you than let them take you back to that life. But it's your choice, Lian. Always your choice. Some choice, marry a stranger or become a slave again. It's a terrible choice, Caleb agreed. But it's still a choice, and if you say no, we'll find another way. We'll fight this in court, hide you, run if we have to. But if you say yes, he stood, moved toward her slowly, giving her space to retreat if she wanted. If you say yes, I promise you this. I won't own you, won't control you, won't ask anything of you that you're not willing to give. You'll be my wife-in-law, but in life, you'll be my partner, my equal. And when you want to leave, I'll let you go. Why would you do that? What do you get out of it? Peace of mind that you're safe, the chance to know you better. Maybe, if we're lucky, something real. He stopped an arm's length away. But mostly, I do it because it's right. Because you deserve a chance to build a life instead of just surviving one. Lian's hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth, her eyes searching his face for deception, for hidden costs, for all the ways men had hurt her before. Caleb stood still under that scrutiny, letting her look, knowing she needed to see the truth written in his expression. I don't love you, she said finally. I know. I might never love you. I know that too. Then why? Because love isn't the only thing worth building a life on. Respect is. Trust is. The choice to stand beside someone when the world's trying to tear them down, that's worth something too. She dropped her hands, revealing a face wet with tears and something that might have been the first stirring of hope. This is insane. Completely, Caleb agreed. You want to do it anyway? Leon looked at Martha, at Tom, then back at Caleb. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. If I say yes, and we do this, I want it clear from the start. This is business. Protection in exchange for legal status. Not a real marriage, not romance or love or any of that, just survival. Agreement? The words should have stung, but Caleb understood the need behind them. The need to maintain control, to not surrender too much of herself too fast, to protect what little remained of her heart. Agreement, he said. Business, protection, whatever you need it to be. Then, yes. The word came out stronger this time. Yes, I'll marry you. Tom stood immediately. Then we need to move fast. Reverend Price won't marry you, not with his opinions on propriety. But Judge Hawkins can perform civil ceremonies. If I ride out to his ranch now, I might catch him before he heads into town tomorrow. Go, Martha said. I'll help them prepare. Tom grabbed his coat and was gone before anyone could say more, leaving the three of them standing in the kitchen with the magnitude of what they'd just agreed to settling over them like snow. Well, Martha said, ever practical, a wedding needs witnesses. I'll stand for Leon. Caleb, you'll need someone too. Tom, Caleb said automatically. Good. That's settled. Now, Leon, you'll need a dress, nothing fancy, but something better than borrowed house clothes. Martha was already mentally cataloging options. I think my Sunday dress might fit with some quick alterations. And we'll need rings. Nothing expensive, just simple bands. The general store should have something. She bustled off, leaving Caleb and Leon alone in the kitchen. The silence stretched awkward and strange. Two people who'd just agreed to bind their lives together legally while maintaining careful emotional distance. This is really happening, Leon said. Seems like it. Are you scared? Caleb considered the question honestly. Yeah, but not of marrying you, of failing you, of not being enough to keep you safe when they come. You've already been more than enough. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap Martha had given her. Caleb, I need you to understand something. I meant what I said about this being business. I can't afford to feel more right now. Can't afford to trust that this is real, that you're real. Because if I do, and it falls apart. She stopped, swallowed hard. I don't think I'd survive that. Then we keep it business, Caleb said, even as something in his chest ached at the distance she was maintaining. Whatever you need. Thank you. She reached out tentatively and touched his hand, just her fingers against his, light as bird wings. For everything. For finding me. For fighting for me. For this. Before he could respond, she withdrew, leaving him with the ghost of her touch and the strange, suspended feeling of standing on the edge of something that would change everything. Tom returned 2 hours later with Judge Hawkins in tow, a gruff man in his 60s with tobacco-stained whiskers and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice to be shocked by much. He listened to their situation with minimal reaction, asked Leon 3 times if she was certain, then nodded. Tomorrow morning, then, 8 o'clock sharp. My office above the general store. Bring witnesses and whatever you want to swear on. Bible, family heirloom, doesn't matter to me. Just make sure you mean the words when you say them. That night, Caleb lay on the couch again, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. Somewhere above him, Leon was doing the same, both of them caught in the strange limbo between one life and whatever came next. He heard her moving around, soft footsteps on the floor, and wondered what she was thinking, if she was regretting her choice, if she was as terrified as he was. Around midnight, he heard her come downstairs. She moved to the kitchen, and he heard water being poured, a cup being filled. Then footsteps approaching the parlor, hesitant. Are you awake? She asked softly. Yeah. She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in Martha's robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. Can I sit with you? I can't seem to settle. Of course. She settled into the chair across from him, curling her legs beneath her, cradling the water cup like it could anchor her. For a long moment, neither spoke, just shared the darkness and the silence and the knowledge that tomorrow would change everything. Tell me something true, Leon said finally. Something you've never told anyone else. Caleb thought about deflecting, keeping things light, but something in her expression made him reach for honesty instead. I didn't cry at Sarah's funeral. Everyone expected me to, but I couldn't. It felt like if I started, I'd never stop. So I just stood there, dry-eyed and empty, while people whispered about how grief had stolen my ability to feel. He stared at the ceiling. Truth is, I was afraid if I let myself feel it, I'd follow her into that grave, so I locked it away. All of it. The love, the grief, everything. Buried it so deep I couldn't feel anything at all. Until I found you on that platform, and suddenly I could feel again. Terror that you'd die, relief when you didn't, anger at the people who hurt you. All of it came flooding back. He looked at her. You cracked something open in me that I'd sealed shut. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's true. Leon set down her cup, her expression thoughtful. Do you want to know something true about me? Only if you want to tell it. The night I ran from Chenwei, I stole more than just train fare. I stole money he kept in a locked box, enough that he'd consider it real theft, not just missing pocket change. I told myself I earned it, that he owed me for what he'd done. But the truth is, I'm a thief. Tomorrow, you're marrying a thief. Tomorrow, I'm marrying someone brave enough to take back what was stolen from her first. Caleb sat up, leaning forward. Leon, you could tell me you burned down his entire operation, and I'd only regret that you had to do it alone. Whatever you did to escape, I don't judge it. You should. Good men judge bad actions. Then maybe I'm not as good as you think. He smiled faintly. Or maybe good and bad aren't as simple as we'd like them to be. Maybe sometimes survival requires choices that don't fit neat categories. She studied him in the darkness, and he could see her working through something, some internal calculation or decision. Finally, she stood and crossed to him, sitting on the edge of the couch beside his feet. I'm scared, she admitted. Of tomorrow. Of the marshal. Of what comes after. But mostly I'm scared that I'm going to start depending on you. Start believing this is real. Start caring. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. And then lose it all. That's not something I can promise won't happen. Life doesn't come with guarantees. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. But I can promise I won't leave by choice. Won't turn my back when things get hard. Won't ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. A business, she said, but her fingers tightened around his. Business, he agreed, knowing they were both lying now that this had stopped being just business the moment he'd wrapped his coat around her on that frozen platform. Maybe even before that. She sat with him until her breathing evened out, until exhaustion finally claimed her and she dozed sitting up, her head tilting sideways. Caleb eased her down gently, settling her on the couch and covering her with the blanket Martha had provided. She murmured something in Chinese, a word he didn't understand, but her face looked peaceful for the first time since the men had come. He retreated to the chair she'd vacated, keeping watch through the night, protecting her sleep the way he'd promised to protect everything else. Morning came too fast and too slow, gray light filtering through frost-covered windows. They dressed in borrowed clothes, Leon in Martha's altered Sunday dress, deep blue with white lace at the collar, and Caleb in Tom's spare suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. They looked like children playing at being adults, pretending at permanence in a world defined by uncertainty. Judge Hawkins's office smelled of tobacco and old paper, the walls lined with law books that had seen better days. He stood behind his desk, his expression giving nothing away as they filed in, Caleb and Leon, Tom and Martha, and unexpectedly, Abraham Morrison from the general store. Brought the rings, Abraham said gruffly, holding out 2 simple gold bands. Figured you'd need them. No charge. Consider it a wedding gift. The kindness, unexpected and unasked for, made Lyon's eyes shine. Thank you. Abraham nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude, and stepped back to stand witness beside Martha. Judge Hawkins pulled out a worn book, flipped to a marked page, and fixed them both with a stern look. Marriage is a legal contract, but it's also a promise. Words spoken here have weight, whether you believe in their sanctity or not. So before we proceed, I'll ask you both one final time. Do you enter this union freely, without coercion, with full understanding of what you're agreeing to? Yes, Caleb said immediately. Lian hesitated only a moment, her eyes meeting Caleb's, searching one last time for doubt or deception. Finding neither, she nodded. Yes, freely. Then we'll proceed. Caleb Walker, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts you. The words hung in the air, heavy with centuries of tradition, of promises kept and broken. Caleb looked at Lian, really looked at her, seeing past the borrowed dress and the fear in her eyes to the strength beneath. The survivor. The fighter. The woman who'd run across half a country, refusing to be owned. I do, he said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. Lianzhou, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts you? Lian's voice came out steady, clear, carrying the weight of choice even in the face of limited options. I do. The rings, then. Caleb took the larger band from Abraham, turned to Lian and lifted her left hand. It trembled slightly in his, so small and delicate, the fingers still bearing faint scars from work and escape. He slid the ring on slowly, feeling it settle into place. With this ring, he said quietly, I thee wed. Lian took the second ring, her hand steadier now, and repeated the gesture. With this ring, I thee wed. Then by the power vested in me by Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Hawkins closed his book with a thud that sounded final. You may kiss the bride, though, given the circumstances, I understand if you'd rather skip that particular tradition. Caleb looked at Lian, saw her face go pink, saw her swallow hard. Business, her eyes said, just business. May I? He asked, giving her the choice. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. Soft, brief, chaste. Nothing like a real wedding kiss, nothing that would fuel the gossip already spreading through town. But in that moment, with her mouth warm against his and her hand clutching his shoulder for balance, Caleb felt something shift. Not love, not yet, but possibility. The sense that maybe, somehow, this desperate bargain could become something real. When they pulled apart, Lian's eyes were wide, her breathing quick. Whatever she'd felt, she wasn't ready to name it. She stepped back, putting distance between them, and turned to receive Martha's tearful embrace. It's done then, Tom said, signing the license as witness. As of this moment, Lianzhou is now Lian Walker, citizen by marriage. Chen Wei's claim is void. Unless the marshal disagrees, Judge Hawkins added grimly. Federal law is tricky when it comes to these matters. The marriage might hold, or it might be challenged as fraudulent. We won't know until tomorrow. The words cast a shadow over what should have been a moment of celebration. They'd bought time, possibly freedom, but nothing was certain. Then we prepare for both possibilities, Caleb said. He looked at his new wife. The words felt strange, even thinking them, and saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together. Together, Lian echoed, and this time, when she took his hand, she didn't let go. They spent the rest of that day in a strange suspension between celebration and preparation. Martha insisted on cooking a wedding dinner, modest but filling, while Tom made arrangements for additional security. The deputy would watch the roads. Abraham Morrison spread word through town that anyone causing trouble for the newlyweds would answer to him. A surprising show of support from a man who'd seemed skeptical at best just days before. As evening fell and they returned to the Garrett house, reality began settling in. Caleb and Lian were married now, legally bound. And while they'd agreed this was business, the fact remained that they'd stood before witnesses and made vows that carried weight whether they wanted them to or not. I should probably sleep on the couch now, Caleb said as they stood awkwardly in the parlor. Give you privacy. That's silly. The bed is large enough for two. Lian's cheeks colored. I trust you. And it seems foolish to pretend we're not married when we went through all this trouble to make it legal. You're sure? I'm sure I'm tired of sleeping alone and waking up afraid. If nothing else, having you there... She shrugged, trying for casualness and missing. It helps. So they climbed the stairs together, this man and woman who were strangers and spouses in the same breath. They changed in awkward silence, backs turned for modesty, then settled on opposite sides of the bed with a careful gulf of blanket between them. "Caleb?" Leon's voice came soft in the darkness. "Yeah?" "Thank you for today, for all of it." "You already thanked me." "I know, but I needed to say it again. Needed you to know that even if this is business, even if we're doing this for practical reasons, it matters. You matter." Caleb turned on his side, able to make out her profile in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You matter too, more than you know." She didn't respond, but her hand crept across the space between them, fingers searching. He met her halfway, lacing his fingers through hers, and they lay like that in the darkness, married and separate, together and apart, holding on to each other like drowning people clutching at hope. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere, a federal marshal was riding toward redemption with legal orders and federal authority. Somewhere, Chenwei was calculating his next move, planning how to reclaim what he considered stolen property. But here, in this small room, in this small house, two people who'd married for survival found something unexpected in the space between them. Not love. Not yet. But the beginning of something that might, given time and care and the courage to keep choosing each other, become something neither of them had dared hope for. Something real. Morning arrived with the kind of clarity that made deception impossible. Caleb woke to find Leanne already dressed, standing at the window watching the street below with the stillness of prey sensing predators nearby. "They're here," she said without turning. He joined her at the window and saw them immediately. 3 riders at the far end of Main Street, one wearing a federal marshal's badge that caught the early sunlight. Luhan sat beside him, straight-backed and patient. The third man was a stranger, well-dressed in city clothes that had no business in Wyoming winter. "That's Chenwei," Leanne whispered, and Caleb heard the fear threaded through her voice. "He came himself." Tom appeared in the doorway, already armed, his face set in grim lines. "They're at the sheriff's office, waiting. The marshal wants to talk before he enforces anything." "That's something at least," Caleb said, though his gut told him this wouldn't end with talking. They dressed quickly and walked through town under the weight of 100 watching eyes. Word had spread, it always did in small towns, and people lined the boardwalks, pretending to go about their business while tracking every step. Some faces showed support, others judgment, most just curiosity about how this particular drama would play out. Inside the sheriff's office, Chenwei stood examining Tom's wanted posters with the detached interest of someone touring a museum. He was older than Caleb expected, maybe 50, with silver threading through black hair and eyes that calculated value the way other men calculated distance. When they entered, he turned and smiled, pleasant, civilized, utterly cold. "Mr. Walker, I presume. And my dear Leanne, how wonderful to see you looking so well." Leanne's hand found Caleb's, her grip tight enough to hurt. "I'm not your anything. Not anymore." But you are." "Legally, contractually, and financially. The courts have been quite clear on this matter." Chenwei gestured to the marshal, a weathered man in his 40s named Coleman, who looked deeply uncomfortable with his assignment. "Marshal Coleman has the enforcement order, unless circumstances have changed since we last received information." "They have," Tom said. "As of yesterday, Leanne Joe is now Leanne Walker, legally married to Caleb Walker. Her contract obligations are void." Chenwei's smile never wavered. How convenient. A marriage performed mere hours before the enforcement order was to be executed. Surely you don't expect anyone to believe this is genuine? "Genuine or not isn't the question," Judge Hawkins said from his position by the window. Caleb hadn't even noticed him there, but clearly Tom had called in reinforcements. "Legal is the question. The marriage is legal, properly witnessed, properly documented. That changes her status." "It changes nothing," Chenwei countered smoothly. "Marriage doesn't nullify existing debts or contractual obligations. At best, it transfers them to the husband. Mr. Walker, are you prepared to satisfy the $12,000 Leanne owes my organization?" The number hit like a fist to the gut. $12,000. More money than most frontier ranchers saw in a decade. "That's a fabricated number," Leanne said, her voice shaking with anger. I worked for 2 years. I earned room and board, passage from China, medical care, clothing, all carefully documented and compounding with reasonable interest. The accounts are quite clear. Chenwei produced a leather folder, began spreading papers across Tom's desk. Every dollar accounted for, every debt recorded. Caleb scanned the documents, seeing numbers that made mockery of the word reasonable. Charges for things that should have been part of basic employment: beds, food, even the clothes she'd worn while working. Interest rates that would shame a loan shark. All carefully legal, all designed to ensure the debt could never be repaid. "This is slavery with paperwork," Caleb said flatly. "This is business," Chenwei replied. "Legal, binding business that the courts have already ruled on. Marshal Coleman?" Coleman shifted uncomfortably, pulled out his own documents. "I'm sorry, folks, but I've got orders from a federal judge in San Francisco. The marriage doesn't nullify the existing claim. Either the debt gets paid, or Miss Joe, Mrs. Walker, returns to San Francisco to work it off." "How long would that take?" Caleb asked, his mind already calculating impossible numbers. "Working it off?" "At current wages, with reasonable deductions for living expenses." Chenwei pretended to calculate. "Oh, perhaps another 8 to 10 years. Assuming no additional debts are incurred." "You mean assuming she doesn't eat or sleep or wear clothes?" Tom said acidly. "I mean, assuming she fulfills her obligations with the same dedication she showed to running away." Chenwei's pleasant mask slipped, showing the predator beneath. "She stole from me, Sheriff, made me look weak in front of other workers. I can't allow that to stand." "This isn't about money," Leon said suddenly, her voice clear and hard. "This is about control, about making an example. You don't care about $12,000. You care that I escaped, that I chose freedom over your ownership. You chose theft over honor, cowardice over obligation." Chenwei took a step toward her, and Caleb moved immediately, putting himself between them. Chenwei smiled at that. How touching. The frontier hero protecting his damsel. "Tell me, Mr. Walker, are you prepared to die for Haber? Because that's what this will require. I have the law on my side, federal backing, and resources you can't begin to match. You're nothing but an obstacle." "Then I'm an obstacle you'll have to remove," Caleb said quietly, "because she's not going anywhere with you." The room went silent, tension thick enough to choke on. Coleman's hand drifted toward his gun, then away, clearly torn between duty and conscience. Tom's fingers drummed on his desk, and Caleb recognized the rhythm. The sheriff was thinking, planning, looking for angles. "There may be another option," Judge Hawkins said slowly. All eyes turned to him. "The marriage does create legal complications, whatever Mr. Chenwei claims. Marital property laws in Wyoming territory are complex. If we petition for a formal hearing, get testimony about the conditions Miss Walker endured, the nature of the work she was forced into, we might build a case for contract invalidation based on fraud and coercion." "That would take months," Chenwei said dismissively. "Meanwhile, she remains here." "I think not." "Meanwhile, she remains with her legal husband," Judge Hawkins corrected, "under territorial jurisdiction. You can challenge that, certainly, but it will require legal proceedings." Proper proceedings. Not just a federal order obtained under incomplete information. Chenwei's expression hardened. "You're stalling." "I'm following the law. The same law you claim to be upholding." Hawkins met his gaze steadily. "Unless you'd prefer to handle this another way. Perhaps the way you handled things in San Francisco. Force instead of law." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Whatever Chenwei had done in California, whatever violence he'd used to maintain control, it wouldn't be tolerated here. Not with witnesses, not with a federal marshal watching. "Marshal Coleman," Chenwei said icily, "I expect you to enforce your order." Coleman looked between all of them, clearly calculating politics and conscience. Finally, he sighed. "My order says to remand her if the debt isn't satisfied and circumstances haven't changed. But circumstances have changed. She's married now. That muddies things legally. I'm going to need to telegraph back to San Francisco, get clarification on how to proceed." "That's unacceptable." "That's how it's going to be," Coleman interrupted, showing steel beneath his earlier discomfort. "I'm not hauling a married woman across state lines on a questionable debt claim without proper legal backing. You want to challenge that? take it up with my superiors. But right now, she stays. Chen Wei's control cracked completely, rage flooding his face. This is absurd. She's a thief and a liar. She belongs to me. I will not. You will not do anything, Tom said, standing and resting his hand deliberately on his holstered gun. Accept the marshal's decision. This is my jurisdiction, and in my jurisdiction we handle disputes through law. Not threats, not force. Law. For a moment Caleb thought Chen Wei would push it, saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing options, considering violence. But then Liu Han touched his employer's arm, murmured something in Chinese, and Chen Wei visibly collected himself. Very well, he said, his voice controlled again but vibrating with suppressed fury. We'll pursue this legally, file the necessary motions, build the proper case. But understand this, all of you, I will have what's mine, whether it takes months or years, whether it costs thousands or tens of thousands. She will pay what she owes, one way or another. He turned on his heel and walked out, Liu Han following. Marshal Coleman lingered, looking apologetic. I'll send that telegram, he said, and I'll make sure my report includes all the facts, the marriage, the questionable debt accounting, all of it. But Mr. Chen has powerful friends in California. This isn't over. Nothing ever is, Tom said wearily, but for now, it's resolved. Thank you, Marshal. When Coleman left, the remaining tension drained from the room like water from a broken dam. Lian swayed, and Caleb caught her, guided her to a chair. We bought time, Judge Hawkins said. Maybe enough to build a real case. But he's right. This isn't over. Chen Wei won't let this go. Then we use the time we have, Caleb said. Document everything. Get testimony from other women who escaped his operation. Build a case so strong no judge can ignore it. That's going to require resources we don't have, Tom pointed out. Lawyers, investigators travel to San Francisco to gather evidence. We're talking hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands. Then we'll find it. Caleb looked at Lian, saw her staring at her hands, at the simple gold band that had bought her temporary freedom. Whatever it takes. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. They'd won a battle, not the war, and Chen Wei had resources, connections, patience. He could wait them out, bleed them dry financially, grind them down through endless legal proceedings. They needed something more, something Chen Wei couldn't fight with money and lawyers. The answer came 3 days later from the most unexpected source. Caleb was in town picking up supplies when Abraham Morrison called him into the back room of the general store. There, sitting around a table covered with account books and legal documents, were a half-dozen of Redemption's most prominent citizens: Morrison, Martha Garrett, the town's doctor, the school teacher, the owner of the lumber mill, and surprisingly, Reverend Price. Sit down, Caleb, Abraham said. We've been talking. Caleb sat, wary. About what? About your wife, about Chen Wei, about what he represents. Abraham exchanged glances with the others. We've all heard about his operation in San Francisco, the way he traps immigrants in endless debt, forces women into prostitution, uses the law as a weapon against people who have no way to fight back. And we've decided we don't want that kind of business having any claim on anyone in our territory. That's appreciated, Caleb said carefully. But I'm not sure what you can do about it. We can fight him the same way he fights, with money. Martha pulled out a ledger, showed him a list of names and numbers. We've been collecting contributions. Everyone here has given something, some more than others, but together we've raised nearly $3,000. Caleb stared at the numbers, unable to process what he was seeing. You're giving me $3,000? Not giving, lending, Abraham corrected. Interest-free, payable when you can. We're not charity, Caleb. We're investors. We're investing in the principle that people can't be owned, no matter what paperwork says. And we're investing in the fact that you stood up for that principle when it would have been easier to walk away. But why? Caleb looked around the table. Half of you didn't even approve of me taking her in. We didn't, Reverend Price admitted, his expression uncomfortable. I thought you were making a mistake, inviting trouble, but then I watched her stand up to me on Main Street, saw her refuse to be diminished or dismissed, saw her choose dignity over safety, and I realized— He paused, clearly wrestling with words. I realized she was showing more Christian courage than I'd shown in years of preaching about it. Sometimes the Lord teaches us through the people we're supposed to be teaching. We can't promise this will be enough, the doctor added. Chen Wei might demand more. The legal costs might exceed what we've raised, but it's a start, a foundation to build on. And it sends a message, Martha said firmly, that redemption stands with its own, that we protect people who need protecting, even when, especially when, it's difficult. Caleb felt his throat tighten, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it wisely, Abraham replied. Say you'll fight this thing through proper channels instead of letting it come down to guns and blood. And say that when this is over, you'll remember that this town, for all its flaws, stood with you when it mattered. I will. All of it, I promise. He took the money to Judge Hawkins, who used it to hire a lawyer from Cheyenne, a sharp-tongued woman named Sarah Blackwell, who'd made her reputation fighting labor exploitation cases. She arrived in redemption with 4 trunks of legal books and a smile that suggested she relished the coming battle. Chen Wei's operation is built on fraudulent contracts and coerced labor, she explained to Caleb and Leon at their first meeting. But he's been protected by the fact that his victims are immigrants with no legal standing and no resources to fight back. You've changed that equation. Mrs. Walker is now an American citizen by marriage with a husband willing to fund her defense. That changes everything. Over the next 2 months, Sarah built her case with methodical precision. She tracked down 3 other women who'd escaped Chen Wei's operation, convinced them to testify despite their terror. She subpoenaed financial records, exposed the fraudulent accounting, documented the pattern of coercion and abuse. And she filed motion after motion, forcing Chen Wei's lawyers to defend every claim, justify every number, explain every practice. Caleb watched his wife transform during those months. The fear that had defined her began giving way to something harder, sharper, determination tempered by fire. She spent hours with Sarah, recounting every detail of her captivity, every broken promise, every moment of degradation. It cost her. He saw it in the nightmares that woke her gasping, in the way she sometimes flinched from unexpected touch. But she did it anyway. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the careful distance between them began to erode. It happened in small moments. Lien reaching for his hand without thinking, Caleb making her laugh with a dry observation about frontier life, shared meals that stretched into shared conversations that revealed the people beneath the circumstances. She told him about her childhood in China, about rice paddies and monsoons, and a father who taught her that dignity mattered more than comfort. He told her about Sarah, about grief, about learning to live with loss instead of being buried by it. They never discussed what they were becoming, never named the slow shift from business arrangement to something approaching partnership. But the gulf that had separated them in bed grew smaller each night, until they woke tangled together more often than not, drawn by unconscious need for warmth and connection. The hearing was scheduled for late March in Cheyenne. They made the journey with Sarah, Tom, and Martha, leaving redemption behind for the territorial capital and whatever judgment waited there. The courtroom was nothing like Caleb expected, smaller, dingier, with a judge who looked more like a tired shopkeeper than the embodiment of justice. But Judge Morrison, no relation to Abraham, had a reputation for fairness that transcended his rumpled appearance. Chen Wei attended with 3 lawyers, their expensive suits and polished confidence a stark contrast to Sarah's practical dress and frontier directness. He smiled at Lian across the courtroom, a predator's smile that promised retribution. The hearing lasted 2 days. Sarah presented her evidence methodically: the fraudulent debt calculations, testimony from escaped workers, documentation of coercion and forced prostitution. Chen Wei's lawyers countered with legal precedent and contract law, arguing that debt servitude was different from slavery, that the women had entered agreements voluntarily, that changing circumstances didn't void legal obligations. On the second day, Sarah called Leon to testify. Caleb watched his wife take the stand, saw her hands shake as she placed them on the Bible, heard her voice waver on the oath. But when Sarah began questioning her, something steadied. Leon spoke clearly, calmly, recounting the promises made and broken, the work that became exploitation, the moment she realized she'd been sold rather than hired. "Did you understand what you were signing when you agreed to Mr. Chen's contract?" Sarah asked. "I understood I was agreeing to work. I didn't understand I was signing away my freedom. What did you think would happen if you worked hard and followed the rules?" "I thought I'd earn enough to pay my debt and send money to my family. I thought if I was good, if I was useful, I'd be treated with basic dignity. Lian's voice strengthened. I was wrong about all of it. Chen Wei's lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Thornton, rose for cross-examination with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case. Mrs. Walker, isn't it true that you stole money from Mr. Chen before you ran away? Yes. The admission rippled through the courtroom. Thornton smiled. So you're a thief. I took back a fraction of what I'd earned. What he owed me for 2 years of work, he never properly compensated. But you did steal. You did break your contract. You did run away from legal obligations. I escaped from slavery. If that makes me a thief in your eyes, I'll wear that label proudly. Thornton's expression hardened. You claim you were forced into prostitution, yet you had opportunities to seek help, to go to the police, to contact federal authorities, to reach out to charitable organizations. Why didn't you? Lian looked at him with something close to pity. Because I'd seen what happened to women who tried. They'd disappear, turn up dead in the harbor, or gone entirely. Mr. Chen owns the police in Chinatown. He owns the charitable organizations. He owns everything and everyone that might have helped. Running was the only option that offered any chance of survival. Convenient that you can't prove any of this supposed violence or intimidation. I can prove this. Lian stood, unbuttoned the top of her dress with shaking fingers, and pulled it down to reveal her shoulder. Across her back, visible to the entire courtroom, ran a lattice of scars, some old and faded, others still pink with recent healing. These are from the times I tried to leave and was brought back. These are from the times I didn't smile enough, work fast enough, submit quietly enough. You want proof of what Mr. Chen's operation does to women? Here it is, written on my skin. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Thornton seemed at a loss for words. Chen Wei's face had gone rigid, his control absolute but clearly costing him. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Walker, you may redress yourself. Mr. Thornton, unless you have further questions that don't involve humiliating the witness, we'll move on. Thornton had nothing. He sat down and Sarah rested her case. Judge Morrison took 30 minutes to deliberate. When he returned, his expression gave nothing away. This court has reviewed the evidence and testimony presented by both parties. Mr. Chen Wei's organization operates within the letter of the law, barely, but uses that law to perpetrate what can only be described as indentured servitude through fraudulent debt accounting and coercive practices. While the contract Mrs. Walker signed may be technically legal, the circumstances under which she was held violate both territorial and federal prohibitions against slavery and human trafficking. He looked directly at Chen Wei. Your business practices disgust me, sir. The fact that you've found legal loopholes to exploit vulnerable people doesn't make you a businessman. It makes you a slaver with paperwork. Then he turned to Lian. Mrs. Walker, this court finds that your debt to Mr. Chen Wei is void due to fraud and coercion. Furthermore, any claim he has on your labor or person is terminated immediately and permanently. You are free. The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning penetrated. Then Lian's knees gave out, and only Caleb's quick reflexes kept her from hitting the floor. He held her while she sobbed, held her while the courtroom erupted in noise and motion, held her while Chen Wei stormed out with his lawyers trailing behind, his face promising that this defeat would be remembered. But none of that mattered, because she was free, legally, finally, completely free. They stayed in Cheyenne one more night, celebrating quietly in their hotel room. Lian was quiet, processing, and Caleb gave her space while staying close enough to reach. I don't know what to do now, she said finally, staring out at the dark street below. I've spent so long running, surviving, fighting. Now that it's over, I feel empty. Not empty, just open. Caleb moved to stand beside her. Open to whatever comes next. Whatever you want to build. She turned to face him, and in the lamplight her eyes held questions he wasn't sure how to answer. What about us? About this? She touched her wedding ring. We did this for legal protection. That's finished now. If we need to what? Dissolve the marriage? Caleb took her hands, felt the familiar weight of her fingers in his. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. I just know I don't want you to feel trapped. This was supposed to be business, protection. You've given me that. You don't owe me anything more. Well, what if it's not about owing? He pulled her closer, slowly, giving her time to resist. What if somewhere between that train platform and this hotel room, business became something else? What if I want you to stay, not because of legal obligations or debt or protection, but because the thought of you leaving makes everything feel empty again? Caleb, her voice broke on his name. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. If you need time, if you need space, if you need to figure out who you are outside of survival, I understand that. But I need you to know this isn't obligation for me anymore. Maybe it never was. He touched her face gently, wiping away tears with his thumb. I'm choosing you, Lian. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Because somewhere along the way, you became the reason I wake up in the morning. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the hidden cost, the inevitable betrayal. But whatever she found made something in her expression crack open. I'm terrified, she whispered. Of what? Of this. Of trusting it. Of believing that someone could want me, not my labor, not my body, not what I can provide. Just me. Broken, scarred, still learning how to exist without fear. How do I trust that? The same way I learned to live again after Sarah died. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. He rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise it'll be easy. Can't promise I won't mess up or that life won't throw more trouble our way. But I can promise I'll keep choosing you every single day for as long as you'll let me. Lian's arms came up around his neck, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. I want to believe you. Then believe me. Or don't. But stay anyway. See what happens when you're free to choose something instead of running from everything. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, and what he saw there stole his breath. Not fear this time. Not calculation or guardedness or the careful distance she'd maintained for months. Hope. Raw, terrifying, beautiful hope. Okay, she said. I'll stay. Not because I have to, not for legal protection or safety or any practical reason, but because... She paused, gathering courage. Because I think I might be choosing you, too. And I want to see where that leads. Caleb kissed her then, properly this time. Not the chaste brush of their wedding, but something real and deep and full of promise. She kissed him back with an intensity that spoke of months of restraint breaking, of walls coming down, of two people finally allowing themselves to feel what they'd been fighting. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and trembling, Lian laughed, a sound of pure joy that Caleb had never heard from her before. What? He asked, smiling. I was just thinking. We did this completely backward. Marriage first, then friendship, now maybe love. Most people do it the other way. We're not most people. No, we're really not. She touched his face, wonder in her expression. When you found me on that platform, I thought I was dying. I'd made peace with it, but you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. What's that? A reason to live instead of just survive. A chance to build something instead of just running from things. You. She kissed him again, soft and sweet. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself, for choosing me when I couldn't imagine anyone would. Thank you for letting me, Caleb said, for trusting me with your truth, for being brave enough to stay when leaving would have been easier. They stood like that, wrapped in each other, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Not out of obligation or necessity, but because they'd chosen it, chosen each other. They returned to Redemption the following week to find the town preparing for spring. Snow was melting, revealing the brown earth beneath, and with it came the sense of new beginnings. The community had raised enough additional money to start rebuilding Caleb's cabin, not just as it was, but better, larger, with room for a family. Getting ahead of yourselves? Caleb asked Abraham when he saw the plans. Seems like you two might need the space eventually, Abraham said with a knowing smile. Besides, gives us all something useful to do now that we don't have to worry about fighting off Chinese gangsters. The rebuilding took months. Caleb and Lian lived with the Garretts during construction, and the town pitched in, raising walls, laying floors, building a life brick by brick and board by board. Leanne worked alongside everyone, her strength surprising men who'd assumed she was delicate. She learned frontier skills with the same determination she'd shown escaping Chenwei, and watching her transform from frightened refugee to confident frontierswoman made Caleb's chest ache with pride. They moved into the new cabin in June, and it felt like coming home to a place that had never existed before. Everything was new, unburdened by old ghosts or past lives. It was theirs, built by their choices, their community, their shared determination to create something good from something terrible. That first night in their new home, lying in their new bed with moonlight streaming through clean windows, Leanne turned to Caleb with a question she'd been carrying for weeks. "Do you think about her still, Sarah?" "Sometimes," Caleb admitted, "but not the way I used to, not with that raw grief that made breathing hurt. Now it's just memory, fondness, gratitude for what we had, even though it was brief." "Does it bother you that I'm here in a house meant for her? This house was never meant for her. This house is meant for us, for what we're building." He pulled her closer. "Sarah would have liked you, you know, would have appreciated your spine, your refusal to be diminished." "I think I would have liked her too." Leanne was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for making space for both, for not asking me to replace her or pretend she didn't matter." "You couldn't replace her. Wouldn't want you to. You're not her echo or her substitute. You're you, and that's exactly who I want." She kissed him, slow and deep, and what followed was tender and careful and completely theirs. Not born from desperation or legal necessity, but from genuine desire to connect, to be known, to give and receive comfort freely chosen. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Leanne spoke the words she'd been holding close for months. "I love you." 3 simple words that carried the weight of every wall she'd torn down, every fear she'd faced, every moment she'd chosen to stay when running would have been easier. "I love you too," Caleb replied, and felt something click into place. The final piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. They built a life in that cabin over the following years. Not an easy life, frontier living never was, but a good one. Leanne started a small business teaching Chinese to children whose parents wanted them to understand more than one world. And her classes became so popular they had to move to the church basement. Caleb rebuilt his ranch, this time with Leanne as full partner, her head for numbers and eye for detail complementing his practical skills. The town that had watched their desperate marriage with skepticism slowly came to accept them, then embrace them. They became Caleb and Leanne Walker, fixtures of the community, the couple who'd fought the law and each other's ghosts and somehow come out the other side stronger. Chenwei never returned. They heard through various sources that his operation had been investigated following their case, that several of his business licenses had been revoked, that he'd lost power in Chinatown's complex political landscape. Whether their victory had contributed to his downfall or merely coincided with it, they never knew for certain. But it felt like justice, all the same. On their first wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Leanne with a photograph. He'd commissioned an artist to recreate the image of her family from her worn, creased photo, enlarging it and framing it properly. "So you can see them every day," he said as she cried. "So you remember where you came from while you build where you're going." "We're going," she corrected, framing his face with her hands. "Not just me, we." And that, Caleb thought, was the truest thing either of them had ever said. They were going together, building together, healing together. Years later, when the first snow of winter fell, they would stand on their porch watching it blanket the world in white. And Caleb would remember a frozen train platform, a dying woman, and the choice to offer shelter without conditions. While Leanne would remember the warmth of a stranger's coat, the words, "Come home with me," and the radical gift of being given a choice when she'd had none. They never forgot how they'd found each other. In the space between survival and surrender, in a moment when kindness had been offered and accepted, when 2 broken people had chosen to be less alone. But they also never let that moment define them. Because what came after the rescue mattered more than the rescue itself. The slow building of trust, the choice to stay when leaving was possible. The courage to love again after loss, to hope again after trauma, to believe that sometimes strangers became family and business arrangements became forever. On quiet evenings, they would sit by the fire, the same fire that had warmed Leanne back to life that first desperate night, and simply be together. No words needed, No grand gestures required. Just two people who'd found each other in the cold and dark, who'd fought for the right to choose their own path, who'd built something real from the raw materials of necessity and time. And if someone asked them how they'd made it work, how they'd turned a marriage of convenience into a love that lasted, they'd exchange a look and smile. Because the answer was simple. Even if the living of it had been hard, they'd chosen each other every single day. In the small moments and the big ones, in the easy times and the impossible ones, they'd kept choosing each other. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because somewhere between that frozen station and this warm home, between survival and living, between strangers and soulmates, they discovered that the truest freedom wasn't the absence of obligation. It was the presence of choice. And they'd chosen well.